find out more, bring in Anita McNaught. She's covering the story for us from Hatay in southern Turkey. Anita, so people coming out onto the streets, as we're saying, to test that ceasefire. What are you hearing about those protests? Is the ceasefire still holding?
I'm hearing no more and no less than what you're hearing. We know there are protests. They've just begun in Deir ez-Zor in the east of Syria, in the eastern suburb of Damascus of Barza, and 2 protests in the province of Idlib. As far as we understand, and we're seeing live feeds from some of them, there hasn't been any violent incidents associated with those protests yet. But this is exactly the sort of test that the people who are opposed to the government of Damascus are going to need to put this ceasefire under. Because if the ceasefire means anything at all, it has to protect people's rights to express their views peacefully on the streets in a non-militarized way. So this is what they said they were going to do to test the validity of the ceasefire, and this is what in 4 small areas at the moment they're attempting to do.
And Anita, even though it appears to be calm, the situation in Syria, even though those people are out on the streets, we are hearing that Syrian regime tanks and troops do remain in parts of the country, and that their withdrawal, rather, was in fact a ceasefire term as well.
Well, withdrawing tanks from towns and cities was part of the agreement. Withdrawing the military equipment of the Assad army was part of the agreement. But there were a lot of loopholes in this agreement. It said towns and cities, but it didn't mention villages. It talked about the army, but it didn't talk about the other security services that work for the government in Damascus, like the very feared Shabiha, the sometimes uniformed, sometimes not, enforcers of the regime, who are the ones that opposition activists and indeed beleaguered civilians tell us are the ones they are really afraid of, because they're the ones who do some of the greatest damage house to house. So these people are not specifically mentioned in the plan and therefore potentially outside it. What I'm hearing from an activist who is in Jebel az-Zawiya, and I have to be clear about this, I'm reporting what I hear directly from people. I'm trying not to work on second-hand information at all. An activist in Jebel az-Zawiya who knows the situation in Idlib, I've yet to speak to anyone inside Idlib itself, is telling us that the tanks have not withdrawn from Idlib, that there is an army barracks right in the middle of the city that would take a month to dismantle, he says, and that the Shabiha and the other security services are very, very present on the streets there. There are checkpoints not only in the city itself, but on the roads leading out of it. And although no one is firing or shelling at anyone at the moment, the sense of threat and the sense of potential threat and where the army are actually in control and the way they're able to enforce their will hasn't changed. The fact that they're not firing directly doesn't mean that the menace is any less real for the people inside of Idlib city itself.
Right, Anita, and just one more thing. I'd like to ask you about the opposition. How committed is the opposition to that ceasefire?
Well, the Free Syrian Army that we know of in the northern provinces of the country have committed to observing the ceasefire. No one wants this violence to go on. It's one of those things that we'll just have to wait and see how it pans out. No one knows what the provocative acts are going to be. No one knows who the agents provocateurs are going to be in this conflict, because opposition fighters and activists have accused the government of staging incidents to provoke them, and of course the government in Damascus believes very firmly that what they call armed terrorist groups are engaged daily in acts of sabotage and violence in order to provoke their forces. So the bottom line is, without independent, neutral observer missions inside the country, attributing blame, attributing cause, or stating where the violence came from or where it might restart is a very hazardous business indeed.
All right, Anita McNaught reporting from Turkey. Thank you, Anita.